My name is Brian Scott, and I am becoming a conference ministerial candidate for the conference. In addition to that, I also happen to work for the conference. So I work with our superintendent, our office staff, just to make sure that everything that we do as a conference continues to flow. We can support our churches, we can support our pastors, and then we're there to provide resources and come alongside our pastors and our churches in whatever areas they need. I grew up in the rural South. Where I grew up, there is a huge influence of this cultural Christianity. The environment I grew up in, everyone I knew was a Christian. This idea, if you'd asked me what it meant to be a Christian, I couldn't have given you an answer. It was just a thing you were. And then I went off to college. And it's really funny. I tell people all the time when they ask me similar kind of questions, I'm like, I don't know when I was saved, but I know when I fell in love with Christ. When I was a sophomore in college, after almost a year and a half of living a life that looked nothing like Christ and nothing like the Christian faith, I took an intro philosophy class at the University of Georgia, where I was going to school. And it was the first time in my life where I was surrounded by people who identified as atheist, the professor included. And I was still saying I was a Christian. I've been saying I was a Christian my whole life. That's just what I was. And it was the first time in my life that people were pushing back on that. To be a Christian meant for me to be other in that environment, and I'd never experienced that before. And so they started asking me all these questions. They're like, well, if you say you're a Christian, how do you answer this? How do you reconcile this about the Bible? How do you answer these questions about God and existence? And I really quickly realized, I was like, I need to find out if there are answers to these questions, or I need to stop saying I'm a Christian, because this middle position I'm in is untenable. It's not going to last. And so that led me down this whole deep dive of, I read the Quran, I read the Bhagavad Gita, I read Taoist texts, I read Bertrand Russell, Christopher Hitchens, Nietzsche, I went the whole gamut, Richard Dawkins, and then I started reading people like Augustine and Aquinas and St. Teresa of Avila and Kierkegaard, and then that worked its way to C.S. Lewis and Timothy Keller and some of the more recent, people, and that led me to reading the Bible for the first time in my life of my own volition. I'd read the Bible before, I'd been around it, things like that. But I actually chose, I was like, I want to read this book. And I went to a church for the first time of my own choosing in my life. And it just blew my mind, because what I came to see was not only was what was being presented to me here in these Christian texts of these sisters and brothers through 2,000 years of history and in, the biblical narrative in Scripture, it was more true than what I saw and what was being offered to me in these other areas. It mapped onto the world I saw in a more true way than I could explain with any of these other narratives. But what I loved most about it is it gave me this beautiful story of creation that nothing else could touch. If this is what we're supposed to be, if this is how we were created to be, if this is what God looks like and why he created, that none of these other faith systems, what they were offering me, came anywhere close to that. And I just remember saying, this is real and this is beautiful. And if that's true, that means something. I know we all love to say changed overnight kind of thing, but I'm still me. I still grew. I still had a lot of growing to do. But from that time period, there was always something different about the world. The world was different. I was different. There was a different purpose for why I was here. And then my wife and I moved back to Georgia, where we had grown up. We moved to Atlanta, and began attending and serving at a church there. And it was actually a Presbyterian church we were going to. But the pastor was this incredible guy. And through my seminary studies and Haley and I's conversations and prayers, like we'd already come to have this Wesleyan theology. But, we were going to this Presbyterian church here and loved the church, grew in so many ways because of that church and that pastor and the people there. And he was like, this was just kind of the guy he was. He was like, dude, you're supposed to be a pastor. And I was like, no, Tolliver, like, I'm definitely not. I'm going to be an academic. I'm going to go down the PhD route. And he was like, nah, man, you're supposed to be a pastor. And he was like, look, I'd love to get you started on the path here in the Presbyterian church, but unless you change your mind about a couple things, we can't make that happen. He's like, look, I'll let you teach. I'll let you, lead small groups, things like that. It's like, we just won't have you teach on soteriology, but everything else, fair game. Just through a lot of prayer and discernment and just community pouring into us. And there was a small group Haley and I were leading there together that was mostly young adults, and just pouring into them and being a part of their lives in a deeper way than I'd ever gotten to be with a group of people before. And I use this language because our pastor at the church did, pastoring that group of people. Growing up in the South, it's not really prevalent down there. But we got out here and I looked it up and I was like, okay, yeah, I can get behind who they say they want to be. And who you tell me you want to be tells me a lot more than about what you're doing right now, because I can join you on that path to who we want to be together. And so I loved who they said they wanted to be. I loved the history of, not even going into the history of Wesleyanism and the idea of Methodism in general and what that represents, but the history of the Free Methodist Church and getting to step into that. I was like, yeah, I can do that. And then we went to a church in Azusa, California, called Foothill Community Church. And from the second we stepped in there, there was this wonderful woman named Gail Wallace who came up to us. And everyone greeted us, but Gail came up to us and said, hey, can I sit with y'all? It's your first night. Can I sit with y'all? And we were like, she probably didn't say y'all. That's my Southerness coming out. But Haley and I were like, yeah, that sounds great. And we went. We sat with Gail for that first service. We went out into coffee in the courtyard is what we call it after the service. Spent some time out there talking to people. And we got in the car after the service and we're like, this is our church. This is our church. It felt like a family that just wanted us to be a part of it. And I think that's a big part of what we are here as Free Methodists. Like, we don't have it all figured out, and we don't claim to be the one that has everything figured out. But we all want to do this thing, to look more like Christ together. And it's messy, and it takes all of us working in the gifts and places God's called us together as a family to do that. And that's what Foothill represented to us and what the Free Methodist denomination represented to us. And I was like, these are people we can do this with.